Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Damas y caballeros, muy buenas tardes. Sean todos ustedes bienvenidos a la conferencia inaugural, conferencia de prensa de esta novena conferencia ministerial de Bali de la OMC. Tenemos al ministro de Indonesia, Gita
General Roberto Azevedo. Each of these men will give a brief opening statement. We will take your questions. I'd be very grateful if you could identify yourself and your news organization, and you can receive the mics from one of the ladies in the corridors. Mr. Chairman, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Keith. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gita Wirjawan, the Minister of Trade for the Republic of Indonesia, and as chair of the MC9, I want to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the beautiful island of Bali. And I just want to say my thanks to everyone who's worked their hardest the past periods, whether it's days, weeks, or months, or even years, to get us this close. And I think you would have heard the speeches made by the President, by the Director General, and a few others who have basically made the observation that we have gotten very close to the finish line, but the fact that we're not there yet is because of reasons that we all understand. And the reasons, I think, relate to the aspirations of people that still need to be understood a little bit better. We're hopeful that in the next 3.5 days, we'll have the opportunity to sit down and have a more thorough discussion with each other. And the issues have been very, very clearly identified by way of what has converged and what has not converged yet. And we're hopeful that, not only by way of the statements that are going to be made by all the 159 ministers starting tomorrow, the day after, and even Friday, you will have a chance to basically see the evolution or the changes in the next 3.5 days. But with that, I want to thank the Director General for the hard work that he's put into this, conference. And, the Bali package is something that I think everybody wants to see happening in Bali. Yes, there are still some who may want to basically embellish, the shape and form of the Bali package. And I think the next 3.5 days will be a defining moment for all of us. I think we all must understand, as chair, we're hoping for the best of outcomes, but also we're fully cognizant of the risks that in the event that we come out of Bali without a positive outcome, I think it will be a tragedy to the institution and I think to many economies around the world. With that, I will pass the mic to Roberto to elaborate on further details. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gita. I should start by thanking the hospitality of the Indonesian government and people. They are certainly doing their very best to help members achieve a satisfactory outcome here in Bali. And this is in fact one of the most important events in WTO history. Our work in Geneva has brought us really close to a conclusion of negotiations which would lead to a multilateral agreement, which would be the first in the history of the WTO. But unfortunately, we did not quite get to the finish line. We're not really there yet, as the minister just said. We brought from Geneva a series of texts that the ministers will have to consider here. And this is a very considerable package of measures. And if we agree on those measures, we would, for example, boost the world economy by, according to some estimates, about $1 trillion a year, which is roughly the equivalent of the GDP of Indonesia. And we would also be helping and supporting developing countries into global markets. At stake also is the future of the WTO as an agent of the global economic governance. All of this hangs in balance here in Bali. But let me be clear, a successful outcome is possible. It is doable. I still believe it can be achieved. Nothing that is on the table today is too technical, and nothing requires governments to do anything that is unmanageable. And this is very important that I stress. No member is being asked to do the impossible. Any misgivings that a member may have would have to be about not getting everything that they hope for. But the ideal package does not exist for any of the 159 members, and that is not how negotiations work. What halted our work in Geneva was not a lack of effort or a lack of commitment. Rather, it was a few very limited, very specific, and very localized political issues. The remaining obstacles are well defined, and they are not very difficult to solve, actually. But they require political calls, and the kind of political calls that could not be made in Geneva. So this is what the next few days are about. That's why we're here. Ministers can make those calls. We have freed up a great deal of space on the conference calendar to allow for intensive engagement by ministers so that we can locate the landing zones that we need to bring this package home. What we need here this week is for ministers to show political will and engagement. The overwhelming message that I am hearing from members is that they want a deal and that they realize what is at stake. These calls come from both developed and developing countries. In the areas where we still have difficulties, what we call the proponents and the opponents, they are mostly of similar level of development. It's not a north-south divide. There is a large number of vocal advocates for the Bali package, and if we deliver, the winners would be many. But in contrast, if we fail, there will be a long list of losers, and they would include businesses around the world, the unemployed, the underemployed, the poor, the developing country farmers, people who rely on food security schemes, and of course the multilateral trading system and the WTO itself. I read a quote from a newspaper today, which put it quite well. It said that a weakened WTO would lead to the law of the jungle. And it's quite true. And it is the weakest and most vulnerable in the jungle who would suffer the most. The outcome is now in the hands of the ministers. This meeting represents our best chance at a deal. We cannot delay, hoping to complete it in Geneva in the future. The kind of political constraints that we have today will not simply disappear with the passage of time. We have to finish this work now. If ministers can show the political will to overcome these last few obstacles, then we will have a package. We will deliver a huge boost to the global economy, and we will have a vibrant multilateral trading system once again. Thank you.
Questions?
Can I hear from here?
You'll have to listen on to things. Yes, please, the lady in the aisle just there, the central aisle. A mic's coming.
Hello, sir. Ardia from NET Indonesia. And I have a question. It's been the second day demonstration happening in Bali from any farmers organization, not only from Indonesian organization, but also from another countries. So what's your comment about that? And will it be something that reaches the farmers if we have the Bali package? Thank you.
Well, I think manifestations about the WTO are welcome news because it shows that we're relevant, it shows that we're working, and it shows that the work that we're doing matters. Unfortunately, often the work of the WTO is not quite well perceived. And I think that takes me to the second question of yours. It is my firm belief that there is absolutely nothing that we're doing here that will leave any farmer, particularly in developing countries, worse off than if we don't have a Bali package. What we're doing here improves the quality of the conditions of living of the poor farmers everywhere in the developing world. I have absolutely no doubts about that. There is, of course, a lot of misgivings, a lot of misunderstandings, and most of the people would hope maybe to get a lot more. And that may well be the case, that maybe we could deliver a whole lot more. But we're not taking anything away from farmers anywhere in the developing world. So on that, I am absolutely sure that if we don't have a Bali package, farmers in the developing world will be losers. They will not be winners.
I just want to add, I want to thank the local authorities, including the local law enforcement officers, for making sure that things are calm by way of the manifestations or demonstrations that you've mentioned that have occurred in a number of points or parts of the city or the island of Bali. Second, I want to just underline and echo what the Director General has said. If there's something that's going to come out of Bali, it actually resonates a lot more to the hearts of the developing and also the least developed countries. As much as, in the past we would have believed that this was only going to accrue in terms of benefits more to the developed economies. Number two, it's very, very clear. Clearly defined in terms of how the benefits will accrue to the farmers in Indonesia and the world over. And that's exactly what we're trying to get out of Bali. I think finally, these expressions of views and whatever, have taken place in Indonesia. We've gotten a taste of this for, the last 15 years. I think it's up to all of us to basically educate what is going to come out of Bali and how we can educate and socialize the benefits for the very people that you've mentioned, that these manifestations or demonstrations were basically aimed at or for.
Le deuxième question est... Pardon.
If I could complement, just to be clear. For example, in agriculture, which was the question that was put. In agriculture, you have essentially three big outcomes. The first one is on export competition. And that would mean that out of this meeting, there will be a very strong political commitment and a work program to be undertaken by members to continue the fight to phase out the subsidies on export on products which are exported in developed countries mostly, because the developing countries rarely subsidize their exports. I don't think they have even the means to do it, and they don't have commitments to do it. It's mostly the developed countries that do. So to the extent that subsidized exports are out of the market, it is the farmers in developing countries who stand to win. They don't lose, they win. TRQ administration. Most of the countries, not all of them, but most of the countries that impose tariff rate quotas are developed countries. And those quotas are usually not filled. Many times, in many countries, others do fill their quotas, many don't. To the extent that those quotas begin to fill up, it will be the product of the farmers from developing countries that have more opportunities, that have better opportunities to put their product in the international market. They win there again. And finally, there is the issue of the food security public stock holding schemes. Now, the reality is that today, some countries are at the verge of breaching their WTO commitments. Now, what we're delivering here in Bali is room for a work program which will be put in place that will study the situation and examine how to fix that. And we're providing the text that came from Geneva. It doesn't mean that will be agreed here, but the text that came from Geneva is a text that would give a period of time during which there would be no possibility of challenges under the dispute settlement understanding under the agreement on agriculture. Now, if we don't have Bali, none of that exists. All of that is off the table. So any challenges could be immediate. Now, again, I don't see how the developing country farmers could lose with that. Of course, could it be more? Could it be longer? Could it be different? Yes, probably it could, but it is not something that the members could agree on. And this was not, again, something that was north-south. There were many developing countries themselves that had difficulties with the approach that we were taking here in Geneva. So it was often developing countries concerned about their own food security programs and how they would be affected by what we are doing here. So it is not, again, about industrialized or rich countries saying no. It's about developing countries having different views about how to deal with their own food security concerns.
La deuxième question. Mali, ici dans le...
The second question is for the journalist from Mali. The floor is yours. I come from Mali. Wto Mc9.
Encore? Oui.
I was saying, I come from Mali. Wto Mc9 from Mali. According to you, how can international trade take place fairly without penalizing the poor countries?
Well, one of the things that can be done for the poorest countries is to reduce the amount of distortions that you see in agricultural markets. The way to do that is through the reduction of subsidies, through the reduction of measures which distort trade in a way that depresses prices and take opportunities away from the products coming from the poor countries. Now, the only way to do that is through negotiations. Those negotiations on agriculture need to be held in a broader context, in the context of the Doha Development Agenda, for example. But in order to get there, you need to have something that shows us that we can deliver multilateral agreements. That's what we're trying to do here. This is a first step towards a larger deal, toward larger and more ambitious outcomes, that benefit developing countries. To the extent that we don't take this first step, all of that is compromised.
The next question is for Doug Palmer.
Hi, Doug Palmer with Politico in Washington. I just wondered if you could bring us up to date on the status of the trade facilitation text, which I understand there was a lot of unresolved issues. And could you discuss the interplay between the trade facilitation text and the food security question? I mean, does one have to be resolved for the other to be resolved?
Well, on trade facilitation, when we left Geneva, the trade facilitation text is divided in two sections. The first section is the general disciplines. The second section is about special and differential treatment for developing countries and least developed countries. The second section, therefore the S&D, as we call it, was almost concluded in Geneva. We had just a few placeholders for language concerning the least developed countries, which could not finalize the negotiations in Geneva, just didn't have time. That was a matter of time. What we did the subsequent days, so I had the General Council on Tuesday, and after that, I don't remember now whether it was Wednesday or whatever it was. Anyway, it was one of those long days. We continued talking and engaging with the LDCs, and together with other stakeholders, we agreed on the language that would fill those placeholders. So at this point in time, this is not yet agreed text because it happened after the negotiations concluded in Geneva, but we already have the language that would fill the holes that were left for Section 2. So at this point in time, for all practical purposes, Section 2 is finished, so it's done. Section 1, there are still a few issues which are open. Open in the sense that we have brackets. It's not agreed language. Now, of course, when there is no agreement, it's always difficult to tell how it's going to end up. But I have been talking to delegations, I have been listening to delegations, I have been engaging with delegations bilaterally, sometimes with more than two in a room, and I don't think that they're difficult to solve. They are actually pretty straightforward. I think the landing zones are discernible, and it doesn't take rocket science to find a solution for those issues. If the political will is there, they're, by WTO standards, they're very, 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 very easy.
We have time just for one more question. It's for the gentleman seated next.
I think
Sorry.
I forgot the other question, which was the interaction between trade facilitation and food security. And I think one point that, if not all, most members agree, is that we have been negotiating this package as a package, like a package within the single undertaking, let us put it this way. So in our understanding at this point in time is that if one of the elements of the package fails, everything else fails. So that plays for food security and trade facilitation and for everything else. If there is one of the elements which doesn't come through, the result will most likely be that everything else fails as well.
We've got time for two questions if they're very brief and to the point. So the gentleman seated next to Cynthia, and then the lady. The last question will be for the lady just over there in the, to my left.
Minunggu.
I'm from Burkina Faso. I've been hearing about technical assistance to LDCs. What do you define as technical assistance? What is the content that you're giving to technical assistance to LDCs? Thank you.
Well, the way that the negotiations were structured, in trade facilitation in particular, there is some elements, for example, in the cotton decision, which improve trade facilitation. I'm sorry, that improves technical cooperation for cotton producers. There is in the trade facilitation agreement a whole section which is about special and differential treatment for least developed countries and developing countries as well. Those countries, they will receive technical assistance to implement the provisions of the trade facilitation agreement. Now, that means modernization of customs procedures, development of not the physical infrastructure, but the institutional infrastructure that is needed for customs operations. Every single element that has to do with goods crossing borders, in or out, will be subject to that agreement. And of course that for least developed countries, the facilitation of trade is not the only element that is required for their integration in the world economy. Everybody recognizes that. But if they don't have the means, the capacity to make the goods flow across their borders, in and out, it will make it a whole lot harder for them to participate in the global economy efficiently. Most investments today that flow to the least developed countries require some degree of interconnectedness with the world economy, with other countries, with other means of production. And if they don't modernize, they will be lagging behind. Now, the agreement does not only impose obligations, those obligations only come into play once the country has acquired the capacity to implement that provision. And the technical assistance is a necessary requirement for the country to acquire that capacity. So it is there, it is a big outcome, I think, for the least developed and developing countries, and that's why they have been calling very forcefully for the approval of this package. This is something they want. They want to modernize, they want to have the means to participate, and that's what they get with this agreement. Now, I hope that we will get there and that we will deliver this to the least developed countries.
Et notre dernière question est pour
The last question is for the lady on my left over there. You have the floor, madam.
Okay, thank you. I'm Hera from Bloomberg TV Indonesia. The point that you brought from Geneva is about the agriculture point. And now in Bali, it's moving to the finishing point. Everybody talk about we have to finish it, we have to finish it. So a finishing is about the flexibility. So Minister Gita, is that the sign that it's a compromise for the G33 proposal on agriculture or not? And for Mr. Azevedo, I want to ask you about...
just the one question, please.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm going to let the DG answer that question too. 'Cause
You're the chairman.
I'm host. I think it's clear if you listen to the speech of the president earlier today that, and I've said it many times over, that every country, every nation, we have our own national interest, and every other nation has their own national interest and political interest too. But for the spirit of multilateralism to work, I think one needs to show flexibility and sometimes make compromise. And that, I think, is what may be required for the agriculture package to work. And this is something that I think we have been voicing to as many people as possible, and while at the same time basically telling them that the absence of a positive outcome, I think, is going to be or could be a net negative situation for a greater number of people. So you're right, flexibility is a required commodity for this meeting to end successfully. At the moment,